Hello. Welcome back. Okay, so today we're gonna be looking at Craven Manor. It's a book by Darcy Quotes. It's Darcy Quotes. So this is a horror book, and honestly, again, I've only read a total of 14 books, 15 including the one we're reviewing today, Darcy Quotes, Craven Manor. And first horror book, I wasn't scared. Like throughout reading this book, I just never once was scared. It felt more like a mystery / drama, which again, I haven't read that kind of genre yet. But if you ask me, it felt like that. I looked it up on the internet. It doesn't seem to be this book's fault. It seems to be a genre-wide issue. It seems that since there is no sound, it lacks imagery, and if it starts getting intense, we can just close the book and we'll go be finding Dandy laying in our bed in our blanket. So that is why. Also, this book is just 298 pages, just like 2 pages shy of 300. It's a fast read. Okay, so this book just starts by introducing us to the MC. His name is Daniel. He's 23 years old, if I remember correctly. He's introduced or explained, described as someone who's down on his luck. He's a hard worker, but is also implied that he cannot keep a job. As to why that is, no clue. It is really never specified. It kind of makes it seem like people are shitty. I honestly, yeah, if you're a hard worker, I do not know why he can't keep a job. Never specified, never said. But down his luck, his one fault, and like any other character, he lacks self-respect. Throughout this book, you'll see that his motto, quick and simple: desperate people cannot be picky. Now, it's a horror book, and as we all know, characters in a movie / book do not make the right decisions. Never. That quote is the one that pushes the plot forward. Otherwise, this book would last 10, 20 pages at most. So again, the story starts Daniel walking back to his apartment / which is a complex. The complex is described as a raggedy ass place, broken down, dusty, grimy, dirty. When he first enters this building, we are introduced to an old lady. Her name is Mrs. Kushner. Now, she is not important as of now. She will be important later on as an ex machina. After Daniel and Miss Kushner are talking, chatting about whatever they are chatting, which again doesn't matter to his story, he goes to his apartment, and there we are introduced to Kyle, our one and only, our best boy, Kyle. I'm playing. You'll learn to hate Kyle throughout this book. He's annoying, narcissist. So as Daniel enters this room, Kyle is playing video games. Kyle and Daniel chatter about work, the day of life, menial conversations. So Kyle is there playing video games, and as they're talking, Kyle brings up to Daniel that they need to hire a third roommate because their expenses are getting so high. They can barely afford the rent, the bills. So that's all fine and dandy. They want to get a third roommate. Now, here's where you start to hate Kyle. Here's where you learn to hate Kyle. Kyle gets a third roommate. At the end of the day, yes, he is a guest on the lease. It is his apartment at the end of the day. However, Daniel is also paying for his own room. When this third roommate comes into the apartment, Kyle kicks Daniel out of the room, and makes him sleep in the living room without reducing his payments. That is a bullshit move. I was pissed while reading it. It pissed me off. I honestly, throughout the book, Daniel excuses a lot of Kyle's behavior. He's just, he's a cousin, he's family, he's looking the best for me. No, since you have to learn self-respect, which Daniel lacks. May I quote again: desperate people cannot be picky. That is what pushes this book. You learn to hate Kyle. He's annoying, he's a brat. But once they're done talking about getting at the roommate, Kyle brings up that there's a letter for him. Now, when Daniel looks at this letter, shady, it's a heavy letter with no mailing address, so it is implied that essentially it was dropped there by someone. When he opens it up and starts reading, it says, and I'll quote from the book: Mr. Daniel Kane, I would like to offer you the job of groundskeeper for Craven Manor, starting immediately. Follow Tilbrook Street into a forks at the dead oak. Turn right and travel on for 2 miles to reach the property. I look forward to your direct response. Brad. That is not necessarily in of itself a creepy letter. So, as it stands, a little bit sus, but not anything where it would be a bad decision to go and look at the manor, at least through horror book standards. So here is really what the book starts. Once he reads this letter, he goes to the manor. Once he reaches the manor, our boy Daniel starts to make the classic horror movie decisions, the dumb ones. For example, he reaches the manor. It's a rundown manor. It's a manor where you look at, clearly it's haunted. Clearly it's not been taken care of. Clearly it's not been inhabited for at least a decade or more, which 200 years, by the way. So you can imagine how rundown this haunted house is. He decides to go in. He goes into the manor against his best judgment. He himself even says, I could get kidnapped and my kidneys, my organs could be sold. He clearly says that, and yet decides to enter. And then again, I quote, his reasoning is, desperate people cannot be picky. This quote has come up already like 3 to 4 times. Desperate people cannot be picky. That is what driving the plot of this book. Which, by the way, once he enters the manor, he goes into the living room, or the living room, or the entrance room, because it's a mansion. I don't know the names of the rooms, how they're divided. But on the mantle, there is another letter that essentially it describes what his tasks are and what he needs to do. Now, if you were to read these, you would leave. And he does. Let me read you what are the rules he has to follow in order to have this job. Rules. No strangers are allowed into the property. Do not enter the tower. Fair, but why? Do not leave the groundskeeper's cottage between midnight and dawn. Draw your curtains. What? What are you asking? Keep the doors locked. If you hear knocking, do not enter it. What? Do not enter? There is knocking, you want me not to enter it? And why is it through midnight and dawn? Why? And yet, my boy, he himself says, actually, no, after you finish, let's give Dan some credit. When he reads this, he himself says, after he reads the rules, I might be desperate, but I am not insane. And yet he leaves. And the reason why he comes back is that once he returns home, like I said, he's found with the third roommate being kicked out of his room, forced to sleep in the living room because Kyle, being a dick, decided to bring someone else and take Daniel's room. He was paying, so he was entitled for that month at the very least to stay in that room. He's kicked out of the room, got to the apartment, and there Daniel realized, or he himself said, it's better for him to be dead, so essentially live there. This is how much self-respect he lacks. He has none, if any. Against his better judgment, he goes back to Craven Manor, accepts the job, and by the way, per week, for him to do his job, it entails of him first cleaning the crypt, which, by the way, there's a crypt of a girl called Annalise. That is his first task. His pay is 2 gold coins. He has to go to a pawn shop, sell it for cash, and then he's able to use it. But it's implied, it's a lot of money. And again, this is a whole crypt. It's weird, and yet he has to stay. Fine, we live with that decision. There is a book to write. From what we can see from the letters, the first letter that Nana received, there is someone called Bran, or Mr. Bran, or Sir Bran. Mr. Bran. He is the owner. Once Daniel starts doing his work in the manor, we're not introduced to Bran. He's kept mysterious, like away. In order for Daniel to get supplies, to get anything that he needs to do his job, he's instructed to leave a letter on top of the mantle. He will get his supplies by some other dude that the owner hired, which he has his own rules to follow. Leaves Daniel tools at his request. As it stands though, we're not introduced to Bran. We know him by name, but are not introduced to him. As Daniel does his job, his first task that Bran gave him through a letter was to clean Annalise's crypt, as we learn. On his first day there, Daniel does some cleaning to the crypt. He goes back to his cottage, which he is in the groundskeeper that in-house, which he lives there, not in the manor, but in a separate building. Sleeps the night, and guess what starts happening at midnight? There's knocking in his apartment, in the cottage. We don't know, but I'll spoil it for you guys. It's a ghost. He ignores it, but I mean, he's fucking terrified. But I mean, what he can do? Open it and then die? At least he has a good decision not to open this door. Dawn comes up, he wakes up, continues doing his job. Once he's done cleaning the crypt, he decides to make a path from the crypt to the manor, because he knows that Bran goes to visit the crypt, which is why he asks him to first clean the crypt. Once he's in the process of doing that, he unburies, he's trying to take out a weed, and once he does that, he uncovers human bones. We later learn that these skeletons are from the mother of Bran and Annalise. Her name is Eliza. So once he unburies these bones, Bran, through a letter, tells him to bury those bones again. He hates to see them, but Daniel does demand an answer as to why there's bones. He wants to make sure that he's not living with the criminal. Now he's worried, and everything is alright. So Bran agrees to meet with Daniel. They meet at night, 7 p.m. Here's where the whole story of who Bran is and the family that used to live there They're called Mavericks. Bran tells us that his family owns the manor, the property, and they are what the family is called the Maverick family. They are descendants of Vikings. It doesn't never really explain as to why they're rich or to how they got rich, but it is implied that they did essentially run the town when they were at their peak. You could argue that either they ran the town because they were rich or they got rich because they ran the town. Never said, never specified. It doesn't matter to the story, but no, it would be nice to have. They turn out to be shapeshifters. They don't explain why or how they became shapeshifters. They never explain if it was a curse or a witch or like they did some rituals. No, just shapeshifters, born and bred shapeshifters. Nothing different, nothing special, just normal. So once we explain that they're shapeshifters, which again, they're not explained, we're just told they are. Bran reveals himself to Daniel, and what Daniel sees is essentially someone who is not dead or not alive. It is explained that Bran lives in a state of, again, not dead and not alive. And due to this, he looks like a zombie. His skin is paper thin. He weighs almost nothing because he's decomposed or evaporated anything of substance within him. So he weighs almost nothing. Yet, however, even though he weighs almost nothing, he is remarkably strong. And yet, Daniel, for some reason, doesn't seem to be afraid. He just accepts it. And by the way, throughout the book, there are crows on the trees and there's a cat. And we learn that cat and that crow is Bran. So Bran has been seeing what Daniel's been doing all the time. By the way, something that I skipped. By this time, Daniel knows that the ghost that's been knocking in his room is from the crypt and is Annalise. He's asking Bran as to why and how she died, and essentially he's asking about their family matters. Bran explains that Elisa, their mother, killed Annalise in a fit of delusion, because it is said that Annalise was suffered from an illness where essentially she was allergic from the sun. If she were to touch the sun, it would give her rashes and burn. Elisa thought that she was cursed and that this was a sign of unholiness, and Bran said that once he returned home to the news that their mother had killed his sister, he killed his mother. Bran says this, he doesn't hide this fact. Bran accepts this, continues to work, and has now a relationship with Bran in the sense of a working relationship and knowing him. Now, Bran does explain a lot of things to Daniel, but he does leave out some facts. Why? We don't know. And really, the fact that he left out some facts makes it more complicated and creates more plot. If Bran were to explain everything to Daniel, a lot would have been avoided. Again, this book would have been shorter. So Bran does not explain everything to Daniel, and that causes confusion later on in the book. Here's where we reach the halfway point. Now, let's back up a little bit, just to fill in some of the gaps. Before Daniel has this conversation with Bran, Daniel essentially goes back to town to meet up with Kyle, essentially pick up any of his stuff he left back in his apartment to go and fully move in. Here's where Kyle, and once Daniel and Kyle are talking, Kyle invites Daniel out to a bar to have drinks, and Daniel, I guess under the influence, or maybe he was just being naive, showed Kyle the golden coins that he got as payment. And here, Kyle's greed is where it shows. Here, without our knowledge, essentially as a reader, Kyle steals Daniel's coin, and by the end of the day, once they're done drinking, Kyle follows Daniel back to the mansion in secret. So he stalks him back to the mansion, and in his mind, as we learn in the book, he wants to go back to essentially ransack the place, get anything of value out of the manor, so you just, sell for money and not have to work for a while. Now we're back to the present with all the Bran stuff happened. So Daniel, that day, he talks to Bran, which is 7 p.m. Once he finishes talking to Bran, goes to sleep, the cottage. Now by this time, he is acquainted with the ghost. He has seen her and talked to her. Due to some facts that doesn't, again, not so important. But this time, Kyle essentially has broken every rule. He's stayed out before midnight, which is how he knows the ghost is in Elise. And he is not brought strangers, but he's about to break that rule. Technically, he's about to break that rule. As he sleeps, Elise, the ghost, knocks in his cottage. But this knock is different. She is really knocking. She really wants Dan's attention. So he sees the curtains. Elise, the ghost, points to the manor. And Kyle can see that the manor is light up. He's under the impression that it's on fire. But once he reaches the manor, he goes out, reaches the manor, he sees the manor is just lit up. So all the candles were turned on. We discover that the ones who turned the candles was Kyle. So Kyle is there in a drunken state, ransacking the place, stealing everything of value. And then once he meets up with Daniel and Daniel confronts him, again, our one and only, our lovable boy, the one and only essentially says to Daniel, "You're at fault. I wouldn't be doing this if you had offered a job for me to be working at the manor and everything." So he says, "You were never my friend. I'm gonna steal whatever." I was such a reprehensible guy, a hateable guy. So then he starts fighting with Daniel, and for some reason throughout the book, there's like 2 fights Daniel has. He loses them all. It's like he has no strength. Kyle beats him up every time. So Kyle knocks Daniel semi-unconscious, like they're fading. And as he's in that state, he sees that Kyle is breaking down the tower door, which, by the way, it's a rule not to break that tower. Which it's also explained that the one in that tower is Elisa, the one that killed Annalise and the one that Bran killed. She's being held there captive, which is why Bran doesn't want to open that tower. And Kyle is breaking the tower. Now, to his defense, he doesn't know as to why not to open that door. However, to go against him, that door is clearly locked. And he's not supposed to be there, stealing stuff that is not his. And fucking up Daniel. Daniel has a job to keep. And Kyle's fucking that up. I'm sorry, that is not a good friend move. So as Kyle is breaking down this door, he's about to break the 4th and final lock. But Bran comes, snatches him, puts him back into the room, and all this is hidden from the viewer. There's some struggle, and apparently Daniel jumps off the window or throws him off. Never really explained. Bran says Kyle jumped off. Kyle says the Bran threw him off the window. Now, Kyle is a liar, but I also don't know why he would lie about this. But Bran, throughout the book, he is shown to be trustworthy and a good guy. So I also do not know why he would lie about this. But I do tend to believe that Bran did throw him and was just scared to admit that he did throw him. So he lies. And now, because of this, Daniel calls the one that would bring his tools to help take Kyle, the injured Kyle, almost dead Kyle, to a hospital out of the manor. Luckily for Kyle, they make it. Unlucky for us, because there's more book that Kyle will cost. So that day, Daniel spends it out at the manor. He's with Kyle. He's unconscious. But then he goes back to the manor. I do not remember exactly what he did. Some cleaning, some not cleaning. And then he talks to Bran and tells Bran that most likely I would be spending the day out of the manor, so please don't expect me. When he returns to the hospital, he finds Kyle is conscious, he's awake, and he's fine. Now, Kyle says that he will not tell anyone about what he saw. Not because he's kind, because he fears that if he does, he'll be put into a mental asylum, because who would believe that a shadow essentially attacked him or a shapeshifter attacked him? No one. So he just has to keep it to himself. However, here's what Kyle becomes an exposition. Here's what Kyle becomes a fountain of information. Somehow, somewhere, Kyle learned a lot of information from the manor / Bran / Elisa / Annalise. Somehow he learned. He says that the one who killed Annalise was Bran, and also the one who killed Elisa was Bran. Also, that there was a town called Flint that Bran, also in a fit of rage, killed the inhabitants of that town. Now, Daniel doesn't necessarily believe him because Bran already explained a lot of things, so he's kind of going and favoring Bran, as he should do. But then Kyle snaps back. Oh, he already told you his sweet story, his feel sad story. It's true. But then he goes back, and here's where the character Miss Kirshner becomes important to this story. It turns out that she is a fountain of information, again, like Kyle. She used to be part of a historian group which would study the history of the town. A lot of records of when Craven Manor or the Mavericks used to, control are gone. Not because of anything they did, but because time and whatever. So here where Miss Kirshner essentially reaffirms Kyle's story. There is some variance, but she at the end of the day reaffirms Kyle's story. She says that Bran is the one that did all the killing. And he also said that Bran in a fit of rage killed everyone in town. So, upon hearing that there's a town, Daniel goes back to see, not back to the manor, but back to see if he can find this town. When he finds this town, or whatever he can find, because it's 200 years old, but he finds that there's some weird fungus or something growing in there, some infection. So he can clearly see that there are also some bodies preserved or mummified due to this infection. So that confirms one of two things. People were massacred, that the town did exist, and the people were massacred. Now, here's a guess where Daniel does believe Kyle and Miss Kirshner's story. So he paints Bran as the evil one or as the bad one. So he himself in his mind cannot go back to the manor. So he decides to go to Miss Kirshner, because when he tried to go back to his apartment, the old one he used to live with, Kyle, finds out that Kyle had changed the lock. Literally like within days that he then moved. So he goes to Miss Kirshner, sleeps at night, but during his sleep or during the midnight, his thoughts, he thinks it's the wise decision and the good decision, the smart decision, the logical decision, good decision to go and try and free Elisa. So let's put it into perspective. He thinks it's a good idea to go back to a shapeshifter ghost he could get killed to do something that he doesn't need to do. He does dumb decisions that happen in books and horror movies. Do what you will. So once he gets this idea, he decides to go back to the manor, pretend like nothing happened, and go about his day cleaning again. And once midnight hits, once Bran is distracted by Elise, Daniel enacts his plan, which is go to the manor, try to break the final lock the cow had left to free Elisa. Once he breaks his lock and opens the door, nothing comes out. So he decides to go in to try and encourage her out. Once he reaches the top of the tower, he's attacked. Attacked by who? Elisa. Now here, Daniel would have died if it wasn't because of Miss Kirshner back when he was at her place had given her a talisman to ward off evil. Here, this talisman protects Daniel from certain death from an Elise. And here, again, Miss Kirshner with her ex machina prevents Daniel from dying. By this time, Bran notices. He goes and saves Daniel and takes him out of Elisa's claw. Once Bran takes Kyle out of the tower, and out to the front yard. It is so kind of Elisa to let Bran and Daniel have some exposition without her interrupting. Here's where Bran truly explains the story, where Elisa is the one that killed the people in the town, is the one that killed her sister, and his story affirms that Bran is the one that killed their mother. And he found out that once she killed them, that she became what she is now, again in a state of not dead and not alive. A ghost or whatever she is, like a plague. It seems like she's more of a plague / a fungus. So he found a way back in the day to trap her in the tower. Once they're done finished monologuing, they come up with the plan to kill / trap Elisa again using salt, which wards off ghosts and the talisman. Now, here's where it doesn't get confusing in the book, but it would get confusing in me trying to describe because there's a lot of things happening. So if I am gonna skim by a lot of this. The ending almost, because we're almost at the end of the book. I'm gonna skim through it because there's a lot of events that happen that essentially do not matter for me to explain, but I understand that Kyle and Bran did have Elisa essentially blocked off in the manor because Daniel's plan was to spread salt through almost every opening in the mansion, and he had done this. He had accomplished this. So once they were trapping Elisa, and once essentially Bran was worn out and almost beat up by Elisa by this point, Daniel was going to confront her with the talisman and essentially kill her / trap her back in the tower. But guess what happens? Guess why it didn't work out? Yeah, that's right. Our one and only, our boy Kyle, the most punchable face, our two-faced narcissist, decides to pop up, open the front door, which messed up the salt line, creating an opening for Elisa to get out. So she does. She gets out, and Kyle again confronts Daniel, and Daniel for some reason cannot win the fight. He's weak as fuck, noodle arms, and gets knocked by Kyle. When Kyle comes to his senses again, the man is on fire. He grabs Bran, go out to the front yard, essentially at this point in their minds waiting for their death. Here is where Elise and Kyle, which is still surviving, very rare but surviving, try and again to trap and kill Elisa. They try to use Elise as bait because Elisa, for some reason, not explained very well, I guess it's due to her hatred of her, thinking that she's demonic, is very attracted to Elise. So Elisa really wants to kill Elise. So they use her as bait, and Daniel tries to sneak up with her with the talisman to kill her. Now, this would have worked if we do not find out that Daniel no longer has a talisman due to Kyle stealing it from him, our one and only, our lover boy. I don't think I used that word right. Stole the talisman, so it fails. Daniel would have died right there and then. The only reason why Daniel doesn't die is because the crows in a ex machina manner come and save him. The crows that were hanging out with Bran when he was a shapeshifter come and save Elise, distract her by somewhat eating her, and that's enough for her to be distracted and go away. At this point, Annalise and Bran go back to Bran. No, Annalise and Daniel go back to Bran, all defeated. At this point, they're all expecting their death. And now, Kyle, carrying a heavy bag, assuming gold coins that he found, he goes back and notices Kyle. He's afraid right now because Kyle has been infected with Lisa's disease, whatever fungus she's growing. So Daniel does not look so healthy. He's really ugly, terrifying. Kyle's afraid. He tells Daniel to stay away from him, to not reach him. He does tell him he'll find help, but you know that's just a scam for him not to interact and for him to escape safely. But due to the fact that Kyle is so distracted by Daniel, Elisa sneaks up behind him and thanks to the gods so that Kyle can receive exactly what he deserves. That is death. So Elisa kills Daniel, devours him. And since Kyle was carrying the talisman that he stole from Daniel, now that talisman is inside Elisa, Elisa starts dying. It is said that she essentially burns from the inside to the outside. She turns to ash. And now that she's dead, Kyle's fungus stops growing. Kyle grabs the talisman, attaches it to his body, and then that's when it starts receding. It does take years for it to go away. Now, here's where we get our happy ending. Kyle essentially is to inherit all of Craven Manor. Bran is the owner, but since he's somewhat of a ghost, he can't really do anything about it. Bran gives orders to Daniel to remodel the mansion, and Daniel reinstates the history club with Miss Kirshner and her friends. And Bran joins them. They're a bit freaked out, but they joins them and live a happy life, I guess. And Elise is still a ghost. Bran is still his dead in the life thing. And Daniel, well, he lives his best life. So in conclusion, review of the book. I would recommend. It is an enjoyable read. I did find myself wanting to read it. It's not a horror book. I mean, it is a horror book in terms of categorized as that, but it's not scary. It's more of a mystery / thriller, I would assume. Good book, good read. I would give it a 3.7 out of Goodreads. Keep in mind, do not know still what Goodreads essentially is. 5's good, 1 is bad. I gave it a 3.7. Good book. Would recommend to someone. Not a horror book though. That's my take of the story. Thank you.